So my 20s were very transformative years. I lived on my own for the first time, went on exchange to Canada for a semester, got a law degree, and then my first real job as a lawyer. There was a lot of partying, but I also experienced loneliness and insecurity. I'm 43 now, and in this video, I want to share 9 things I wish I knew when I was in my 20s. So if you're in your 20s now, I hope you'll get some value out of this. Hi. If you're new here, my name is Peter, and on this channel we talk about how to live with more intention. Let's get started. A few years ago, I read the book Mindset by Carol Dweck, and it honestly changed my life. It's about the difference between a fixed and a growth mindset. A growth mindset is the belief that intelligence and talents can be improved. A fixed mindset, on the other hand, is the belief that they are fixed. Growing up, I was considered to be the most intelligent of my siblings. Learning came easy to me. But when my homework became harder and I actually had to put some work in, I struggled. My whole identity was wrapped up in this label of being smart and things being easy. I had a fixed mindset. I've been reveling in the praise of being smart. But someone who's smart doesn't fail tests, right? My solution? Doing the bare minimum. And then when I failed, I could say, well, I didn't really try, which was better than actually trying and failing. But my grades suffered as a result. I even had to redo 1 year in high school. I didn't do this consciously, but after reading Carol Dweck's Mindset in my 30s, it was as if a veil was lifted and I could see clearly now. And I wish I knew what a growth mindset was in my 20s. Since learning about growth mindset, I love challenges, learning new things. It's been liberating. I now understand that failure is part of the journey to achieving anything. I like Tim Ferriss' point of view that failure isn't failure if you can gain new skills and develop relationships for future advancement. The way I see it, it's like climbing stairs. They're very steep, so you can't really see where you're going. You can only see the next step. But once you've climbed 10 steps and look back, you see how they're all connected. The worst thing you can do is to stop climbing. Now I follow my curiosity and the world is my playground. Shortly after I turned 30, I had an interesting conversation with an older cousin. I asked him, what is it like being 40? And he said, oh, it's just like turning 30. You think the fun part of your life is going to be over, but it's not true. Nothing really changes. Life is still fun. And you find joy and fulfillment in other things. Taste, what you care about, it evolves. You don't want to party as much, but not because you feel you're too old, but because your interests change. And I found that to be true in my own life as well. If anything, I appreciate the good things in life more now. You can only really start to appreciate the highs when you've seen the lows. I have more experiences under my belt now, pleasant and difficult ones, which gives me a better understanding of what matters more to me in life. Whereas in my 20s, I wanted to do and experience it all, I am now more laid back and appreciative of the moment. So if you're worried about turning 30, don't be. As Bob Marley sang, everything's gonna be all right. Compound interest is the interest you earn on interest. If you invest $10,000 per year with 10% interest, next year you'll have $11,000. Next year, you'll get 10% over $11,000. So you're getting interest over interest. Now it doesn't make much of a difference initially, but it compounds. Over 20 years, the $200,000 you put in will be worth, with 10% annual interest, over $570,000. So TLDR, the earlier you start investing, the higher the return during your lifetime. Now when I was a lawyer, I made decent money. Not the salaries lawyers based in London or New York City make, but I made more money than my dad, which was a bit awkward. However, I knew nothing about investing. I was ignorant. YouTube wasn't a thing back then, except for cat videos. I'm sure there were books about investing I could have read, but, and this may sound strange, it wasn't really on my radar or a topic of discussion with my friends or colleagues. So as a result, I spent so much money on stupid stuff, money I could have saved. I bought an Xbox and 4 games, which I only played once. I had a few kitesurfing lessons and decided to spend $1,500 buying my own gear. But I didn't live close to the water, and I didn't have a car, so I was dependent on a friend driving me to the beach. So yeah, needless to say, I maybe kited twice. I was totally fine with spending most of my salary because if I wasn't spending what was coming in, how could I justify putting in all those hours at work? Now there's podcasts like Ramit Sethi's I Will Teach You to Be Rich, YouTube channels dedicated to personal finance, a wealth of information. If I had had access to all this back then in my 20s and known what I now know about personal finance, I would have been in a much better position financially. But it is what it is. The best time to hit that subscribe button is as early as possible, and the second best time is today. And the same goes for investing. Since embracing minimalism, I'm much more intentional about how I spend my money. Which comes in handy because, unfortunately, I'm no longer making a lawyer's salary, but I can still leverage compound interest. If you're in your 20s, I would start using the power of compound interest now, because it will make all the difference 20 years later. They don't teach meta learning in school, which is the skill of learning. And it makes no sense to me. That skill is more important than 99% of everything I was taught. When I studied French in high school, I would have to memorize a bunch of words every week, a few sentences, and then there was a test. And on to the next list after that. There was some focus on language comprehension, but almost no conversational practice. And today, I hardly speak any French. Je parle un petit peu français, seulement un petit peu. It was the same when I went to law school. Most of my classes were basically like this. Here's a book, read the whole thing, listen to the professor, read the case law, do an exam. So each semester, it would last for about 9 weeks, and I would slack midway through. Then I had to do a heavy lift at the end, frantically going through other people's notes. That's a terrible way to learn something. So meta-learning is the skill of learning. Abraham Lincoln famously said, "Give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, and I will spend the first 4 sharpening the axe." Applied to learning from a book, this means spending some time figuring out how to actually learn the thing. And then there are other methods like spaced repetition and active recall. Spaced repetition involves spacing your revision and reviewing topics, ideally by active recall, at specific intervals over a period of time. This wasn't on my radar at all in my 20s. And I feel if you're in your 20s now, you're so lucky that all this information is available for free online. Just check out YouTubers like Ali Abdaal, Thomas Frank, and Elizabeth Phillips, or pick up a copy of Sönke Arendt's How to Take Smart Notes, a book about the Zettelkasten or slipbox technique. Knowing how to learn effectively will help you so much in school, but also during the rest of your life. Learning doesn't stop when you're done with uni. I'm still learning new things every single day. So apparently Evernote's original mission was to give you a second brain, but this term is now mostly associated with Tiago Forte. He's been teaching a course under his name for years and also published his book Building a Second Brain in June 2022. A second brain is a system for storing, organizing, and eventually transforming information. When I learned about this, I got really excited. There's so many things that I've read, thought, learned, or experienced, but I no longer have access to them because I forgot. By building a second brain, Notion is a popular tool for this, you can turn that around. So I started doing this recently. And my reason is that I consume a lot of content. Podcasts, books, YouTube videos, articles, but I don't actively engage with the content very much. So I forget most of it. A second brain system gives me a means of storing and organizing the things I truly resonate with. Then, whenever I want to create something, like a YouTube video, I don't have to start with the dreaded blank canvas. My second brain is still very much a work in progress, but I'll adjust and improve it along the way. One thing I'm particularly excited about is my book database. This is where I keep track of all the books that I read. I write down the book review, what it is about, the key takeaways. These are things that I resonated with when reading the book, so they're unique to me. So this is what the book summaries database looks like. On the left we have the title, then the author, next to that the year in which the book was published, and next to that the year in which I read it, my rating, whether it's non-fiction or fiction, some tags that I add to easily be able to sort the books. Once the database gets bigger, that will be more important. And finally, the date when I read the book. And I don't just keep track of non-fiction books that I read. For instance, this is a book by Michael Connolly. I have 2 here. The Lincoln Lawyer is the first one in this series. For this book, I wrote down what the book is about, my review, some of the main characters, and then the plot. It's actually quite detailed. Because it's a pretty straightforward legal thriller, I haven't really added any key takeaways to my book review of this book. But I really enjoyed reading it. And by just writing down a brief overview of the plot, if I want to get back to what was the book about, I can access that here. But then for a book like 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Berkman, which is a book I really resonated with, I have a much more detailed book review. So at the start, I just have a couple of sentences on what this book is about, and then my review. But a lot of the work went into these actionable takeaways. You can't control time, you will never have enough time. And then I wrote down some additional information on, what this key takeaway is about and what it means to me. And this has been so great because this forces me to apply these key takeaways to my life. This is what I like about doing a book review like this. By adding these key takeaways to the review, it's a way for me to think about how can I apply what I resonated with in this book to my own life and make it stick. And I wish I'd started building this database in my 20s. If I had, by now, it would have been full of book reviews, podcasts I resonated with, lessons I learned, personal stories. I've been playing catch up, but some experiences from my early life that would have made great stories if only I had written them down somewhere are probably lost for good. In the West, individuality is highly revered. However, the reality is that we are all influenced by the people around us. Just listen to Ramit Sethi's podcast, I Will Teach You to Be Rich, to learn how your parents' money beliefs shape your current money decisions. Jim Rohn famously said, "You're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with." In my 20s, the people I spent a lot of time with were mostly people I have met randomly. Classmates, fellow students, colleagues, roommates. I didn't really feel like I had a choice. But there are only so many people you can develop and maintain quality relationships with. And once you understand that those people shape you, it becomes much more important to be picky. Also, you change over time, and so do your interests. Once you start pursuing big goals, you may no longer vibe so much with friends from your party years. And that's okay. The way I see it, you're not losing friends, you're finding out who the real ones are. The same goes for the information you take in. Those 5 people that Jim Rohn spoke of, you don't have to know all of them personally. In my 20s, I could have read more books about self-development and intentional living. And if you are in your 20s now, you can also tap into the minds of podcast hosts or YouTubers you admire. Honestly, if you like learning new things, this is such an amazing time to do it. And it's even better if you have some sort of system like a second brain to write down the key takeaways. If you're in your 20s now, I think it's especially important to be selective with the information you consume. Social media apps like Instagram and TikTok are fun, but also designed to hijack your attention. And that wasn't something I had to deal with in my 20s. In Digital Minimalism, Cal Newport suggests shaping your environment by doing a 30-day detox and then setting boundaries on your social media use after that. And Benjamin Hardy wrote something similar in his book, Willpower Doesn't Work. He argues that by shaping your environment, you can make quantum leaps in your development. I've become much more intentional about shaping my environment after I learned about minimalism. Minimalism is about eliminating distractions so I can focus on the things that are truly important to me. Things that make me feel fulfilled and happy. If you can proactively shape your environment in your 20s, even better. There's this Dutch singer, Henny Vrienden, who sadly passed away not too long ago. I remember reading an interview with him where he said, "In my 20s, I worried about what people thought. And in my 40s, I stopped worrying about it. And then in my 60s, I realized nobody cared. And when I was in my 20s, I was much more self-conscious, trying to fit in, getting people to like me, overthinking everything. And I had dark moments where I wallowed in self-pity when things didn't go my way. There's a name for this, the spotlight effect. This is the phenomenon where people tend to overestimate how much others notice how they look or behave. But the thing is, people don't nearly care as much as you may think they do. They're all focused on their own spotlight. It's like you're wearing yellow-colored sunglasses and everything you see is in different shades of yellow. And you think everyone else is seeing those same shades. But they don't, because they're all wearing their own unique color. Nobody sees the world as it is with absolute clarity, without their filter. Of course, the fact that people don't care as much as you may think is an excuse to do stupid things. But my point is, don't hold back on following your dreams, speaking out, or exploring new ideas because you're concerned about other people's opinions. They don't really care, and even if some do have an opinion about it, so what? You're the conductor of your life, you're behind the steering wheel, so go for it. In In law school, I had this dream of taking a gap year after I got my degree to go backpacking in Australia. I was very serious about it. I read a ton about Australia, had a subscription to a magazine about the country, went to an Australia-themed fair, and I had saved up around 80% of the money I thought I would need to get by, or get started at least. The plan was to supplement my income by picking fruit or working in restaurants or bars. But when I got my law degree, I told myself, you've got momentum now. You did really well on your thesis and on your 2-month internship. Let's strike while the iron is hot. I figured I'd secure a job offer first and then would bring up my backpacking dream. But you probably know where I'm going with this. That never happened. I was only half expecting to get hired by this big law firm that I had applied to. But when they did, I didn't feel like I had leverage. So I didn't even bring up my Australia plan. I got my job offer, and when I started a few weeks later, I was an M&A lawyer instead of a backpacker. 1.5 years later, I did go to Australia for about 4 weeks on a holiday. It was great. I went to Sydney, Melbourne, the Gold Coast. I met up with some Australian friends I met on exchange in Canada.
Are you petrified? Pretty much.
But it was also bittersweet. It felt like a teaser to a movie I never got to see, which was emphasized by the fact that I was still on my BlackBerry every day, answering emails from the other side of the world. Now, I'm not sure that I would make a different decision if I could do it all over again. I'm no longer working as a lawyer, but I worked at that law firm for about 8 years, and I'm glad I did. I learned a ton, experienced a lot, worked with a great team, very interesting clients. I don't regret taking the job. Yet there's this nagging voice at the back of my head that regrets not going to Australia for a year. I was emotionally invested in it, mentally and financially ready for it, but I chose the safe option. I think it's one of the reasons I quit my job as a lawyer 8 years later. I couldn't shake this feeling that I'd missed out, so I ended up leaving everything behind to go backpacking for a year. Now, because I had already been in Australia and I wouldn't qualify for a work visa there anymore, I decided to explore Southeast Asia instead. The lesson here is that you regret the things you don't do, not the things you did do. I did many stupid things in my life, or things that didn't work out. Terrible karaoke nights, asking a girl out and getting rejected, or when I worked in a hardware store as a teenager, I saw this expensive wooden plate the wrong way while the customer was watching, and then the next day I was moved to an aisle where I could do no harm. I may cringe when I think back to those moments, but I don't regret them. If you're in your 20s, be careful not to make decisions that you may come to regret later. You can always convince yourself that the other option makes sense, it's logical. But if that means giving up on your dream, something you really care about, better think twice and then some more before calling it off. I'm a perfectionist, and as a lawyer, I had the perfect job for that character trait. Lawyers need to be perfectionists because if they mess up, it can have serious consequences. We had this 4 eyes principle for everything of importance that went out. Supervision, double and triple checking everything. Now, while perfectionism results in high quality output, it also diminishes the quantity of your output. And what you create just never feels like it's good enough, right? The desire for perfectionism can be paralyzing. It's like saying, I'm not gonna write this book if I don't know for sure that it's going to be a New York Times bestseller. Or I'm not going to publish a YouTube video until I have cameras that put Matt Diavella's gear to shame and aesthetics that would make Nathaniel Drew envious. What I had to learn as a perfectionist is pushing beyond a certain point yields diminishing returns. But to a perfectionist, every aspect of the project is important. For example, my first attempt at trying to make money online was setting up a Shopify store. I spent days playing around with the color pattern to find one that most pleased me. Yet the product I had chosen to sell was never going to work because the margins were super low. The color pattern didn't matter one bit. The Pareto principle, or the 20-80 rule, has really helped me to snap out of this mindset. This rule says that 20% of your input results in 80% of your output. Not all hours are created equal. The question I now ask myself is, what action really moves the needle? Done is better than perfect. That's also something I apply with minimalism. It's the bigger picture that counts. If you enjoyed this video, you may also be interested in my video, The 3 Lessons I Learned from Minimalism. You can watch it right here. Thanks for watching, take care, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!